This is the podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the podcast. Tonight we are live and we are featuring Lawrence Watkins. We getting right to it.
No talk. You see me blink yet?
It doesn't matter how you feel.
Y'all already know what it is. This is the podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the podcast, and we got Lawrence Watkins in the building. Give it up one more time. Appreciate you joining, big homie.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. I love that introduction and that motto that you have opened up your show. That's a good motto to live by.
I appreciate that. We're going to get right into this discussion. I value this gentleman's time. We actually crossed paths once randomly. And this is also just the power, I think, of what we're going to continue to talk about, too, just networking, meeting people, because I was living in Amsterdam, my wife and I, and all of a sudden we had a gathering on that night. And she mentioned that this guy named Lawrence will be coming through with his wife, and they were in town from Amsterdam, right? I'm just curious, Lawrence, just from your point of view, for everybody listening, like, how did you end up at my house that night in Amsterdam, if you even remember?
I don't fully remember, but I do know that it was during the year that me and my wife, it was at that time, this is, I guess, must have been like 2016 or so. Me and my wife had only been married for about a year or so, right? Maybe in 2017. She had quit her corporate job, actually government job, as an engineer, and we decided to just put everything in storage and travel throughout Europe and South America for 1 year. And we were at towards the end of that particular trip. And I just remember maybe posting on Facebook, maybe some funny story about my wife or about myself in terms of just being in Amsterdam, loving life. And then your wife hit me up. I don't know if you say her name on the podcast or not, but she hit me up.
She's going to be on next week. Spoiler alert. She's going to be on live next week.
So Carmika hit me up. Yeah. So she hit me up. It was like, hey, well, me and my husband live here in Amsterdam. I was like, what? And I was like, all right, well, let's just definitely link up. And that was definitely a memorable experience. I remember your home being very beautiful in Amsterdam, and a lot of beautiful people, beautiful friends that surrounded you at the same time.
Yeah, most definitely. And that was my first time getting introduced to you. So I'm looking forward just to learning a little bit more about your background, how you were brought up, especially given what you do today and having that entrepreneurial background. I really am curious, from a household perspective, were both parents in the household, and how would you describe where you were born and raised?
I was born into a solidly middle-class Black family, suburban in Louisville, Kentucky. Right. I think a lot of times people just make assumptions in regards to, how one was brought up, what their background was like, that type of thing. But I grew up with two loving parents. They loved me to death. My dad was a high-ranking police official in Louisville. My mom was a high school counselor. And just through those experiences and just the love that they showed me between, I guess, my parents and myself, but then also just the extended family too, my grandparents, my cousins, I have a lot of cousins as well, grew up in a very loving, caring environment that supported one another. And that's something that, as I think about the next generation, is a thing that I want to provide for my children as well.
Okay. And you said you were born in Louisville. Did you were you born and raised there through your high school years, or how much time did you spend growing up in Louisville?
Yeah, the first 22 years of my life are spent in Louisville. So after college, I realized, even before that, of course, when I was growing up, people knew that I was good in math and science and kind of funneled me towards that track. And after high school, I decided to attend engineering school at the University of Louisville. It's called the Speed School of Engineering. Got my degree in electrical engineering, but throughout the course of getting my degree, I realized that electrical engineering wasn't for me. So I did a couple of internships, actually 3, at Ford Motor Company. And I remember, so there's this big Ford plant in Kentucky called the Kentucky Truck Plant. It's miles and miles long, miles and miles deep. At the time, it was one of the largest manufacturing facilities in the nation, definitely car manufacturing facilities in the nation. And however grateful I was for the opportunity, I hated smelling paint fumes every day because I worked, 2 semesters in the paint department. I had to wear these overalls, I was, working at the Jiffy Lube up the street or whatever it might have been. And then one semester, I was actually in the body shop making F-250, F-350 trucks. But my job, so 2 things. One, you would go down to the floor and all these robots, just lines and lines of robots. And sparks would just fly all over the place. And I remember just always coming home with burn holes in my shirts because of all the sparks actually flying. And then as an intern, they gave me the most boring job ever. Basically, for 8 hours a day, my job was to go down to the line and color. All right. So my job was to look at each robot and double check that specific robot was making the proper welds on the actual vehicle. So it was very extremely tedious work that I actually had to do. And I say to this day that I must have been the worst employee in Ford Motor Company history because that was a job that I was not passionate about and I did not want to do. But I still thank them to this day for this opportunity. And actually, that was a good guidepost and a good point to show me sometimes knowing what you don't want to do with your life, it's just as good as knowing what you do want to do. So I can rule that off the list. I do not want to work in a manufacturing facility making cars. So decided to go I guess a different path after college.
So you originally pursued, did you say electrical engineering?
I'm double E. So my background's in double E. So I was an electrical engineer.
So, okay, you're growing up. What is it about growing up that said, I'm gonna go to school and major in electrical engineering? I'm even curious, from a household perspective, was college an expectation? Was it something that you were one of the first to do? I'm curious, how did you get to just the thought of majoring in electrical engineering?
So I would say college was an expectation. So that's the first thing. So even though I guess I'm technically second generation college, but my parents went to community college first and then had a long road to get their actual degree, criminal justice and education with my mom. But my brother by this time was working on his PhD, right? And my sister was, I believe, in medical school, when I was on my way to college, right? So college wasn't something that was foreign to our family. And then my cousins went and graduated. So it wasn't something that just no one even heard about or anything like that. Was struggling to try to succeed in, but it was a well-beaten, well-worn path by this point. Also, I had a lot of college prep in high school. So when I was in high school, I did a program that really changed my life. It was called Math and Science for Minority Students, MS Squared. And basically, they sent you for 3 summers, for 6 weeks each summer, to Phillips Academy at Andover, Massachusetts, which is the highest ranking or the most prestigious boarding school in the country. So for every summer there for 5 hours every single day, I would study math and science. Right. Yeah. So in terms of just having a leg up when it comes to succeeding in school, I've always kind of had that. It was something really preached to us growing up as a family. So even though my parents didn't always necessarily know how to do it themselves, they were able to provide me the right guideposts and the resources to actually make that happen.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. I guess I got one more question because what I know about Louisville is Muhammad Ali, and I never been to Kentucky, but I do enjoy bourbon. So I got just 2 questions. I'm curious, and also too, growing up in North Carolina, I feel like Kentucky is even way more racist. I don't know if that's just bias. I don't know if that's irrational, but I'm just curious, how would you just describe your experience growing up in Louisville, especially given the fact that someone like Muhammad, that's Muhammad Ali's hometown, and it has a certain, I think, maybe perception when you grow up outside of that city?
I think that's always the ambiance, or I guess the spirit of Ali is all around, or at least when I was growing up, because Ali wasn't just a figure. There were people in our family, extended, who knew who Muhammad Ali was. The age difference between my grandmother on my mom's side and Muhammad Ali is very, very small. So from that perspective, they knew him before he became a mega famous superstar that was the sports icon around the globe, right? But I think as a city, we take it as a source of pride and strength that someone like Ali came out of Louisville. And also just the fact that if Ali could come out of Louisville and do something great, I know that I can too, right? So that definitely was the mindset that we had. And for Black people specifically, he was definitely a cultural icon for the city in general, but especially for Black people in the city. Ali, of course, is definitely a cultural icon. And one thing I always loved about Ali is that no matter how famous he became, he always took it back to being from Louisville, Kentucky, right? If you watch his post-fight interviews, like that type of thing. When he had his fight against George Foreman, the same thing, the first in Zaire, he was talking about that in regards to like, I want to thank my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville's the greatest, all those different types of things. And that's always something I've kind of taken it with me in terms of me, what I do now, and just what I do in general is try to promote Louisville as much as possible because I love the city. And
from a bourbon perspective, are you a fan? Is it just you have to be? Like, I'm just curious, like, is it or being from there is just kind of like,
People love their bourbon in Kentucky and Louisville, and they use it as a source of like things to talk about within the city. I don't drink alcohol, so so for me, it was like, yeah, we're known for bourbon. I know which friends to point you to if you ever wanted to go deeper on that pathway in terms of doing bourbon tours and that type of stuff in the city. But myself, that was never never something that I got into. Although my wife does love bourbon, she loves whiskey, but I don't drink.
Got it. I'm curious, if you go to school for electrical engineering, like at what point did the entrepreneur itch start? Because I think, like I'm hearing you say you grew up in a household, like did your parents have side hustles as entrepreneurs growing up? Like at what point did the idea of like, what, I need to kind of do something a little different here really start to creep in?
I think it was always innate in me in terms of just who I was, temperament wise, and just also personality wise, and even identity wise when I was very young, right? So I remember this is, in the mid 90s at the height of, Michael Jordan and, winning championships and that type of thing. I remember just always going out and playing ball in the neighborhood with my friends and everybody like, oh man, I'm gonna be Jordan. I'm gonna be this, I'm gonna be that. And for some reason, I just had always pictured me being the owner of the team. I don't know where that came from. I really to this day don't know like where that idea came from, where I even learned about what ownership actually was, right? But I had just wanted to be the owner of the team, and I took it very seriously from like an identity standpoint. So I also remember in high school, I always had an entrepreneurial spirit too. I remember, being the first kid on the bus that had like a CD burner. So I would burn, CDs for mixtapes for all the kids on the bus and charge whatever the going price was, $2, $3 at the time, to be able to, burn people's, favorite CDs and that type of stuff. So although highly illegal nowadays, right? Well, not mildly illegal, I should say. But if you ask the music industry, highly illegal, right? I was able to do that, and that's something I enjoy doing. I remember being in 10th grade in biology class. We were allowed to have one cheat sheet note card that was like two-sided, where you could take into your test to remember, osmosis or whatever, photosynthesis or whatever, terminology that we needed, for the actual test. And I remember mass producing those note cards for all 30 kids in the class and selling them, right? And it's just something that I really enjoyed doing. And it was, a passion of mine was, figuring out, different ways to make money and making sure my ideas actually worked. It was through that experience that I remember to always get paid in advance, people with bad credit, because some of them kids would take my note card and use them, then pay me. So that was one of the first earlier experiences that I learned in terms of that lesson.
So not only did you have the entrepreneurial spirit early on, you were still focused on uplifting the community. Shout out.
Yeah, right.
We gotta shout that out, man. We shout out to people like you who help people like me get through public school, through K-12. It's so necessary. It's wow, man. Shout out again, man. And so it's okay. That's here. Okay, so I'm hearing that you always sort of had to. You ended up going back to school, and I guess my question is like, what made you say go back to school versus do something else at that time? If you had the experience as an intern, you have this natural itch, but like, what made you say, what, let me go back to grad school, and why did you end up going back for the program you chose?
Well, there was some time in between that of about, I think 2 years or so. So during my senior year of college, my last year of college, I actually spent 5 years in undergrad because I did some additional programs, summer programs, and other types of things, and those internships as well. Yeah, I had already made the decision that like my interest lied somewhere else, right? So me finishing my engineering degree was because, well, by the time I figured that out, I was already 3 years in, and I was still doing pretty good at it. So I might as well just finish getting this degree, this stamp of approval to say I can do this base level work from like an income generating type of standpoint. But I had also run for student government president while I was in college, for example, just because I wanted to improve my speaking, my public speaking and leadership skills. I had already started working with my brother, Dr. Watkins, who had just started as a professor at Syracuse. So I helped him, promote his books at the time, and doing some media type of things, just very, very broadly at that particular moment. And it was him who floated the idea that I think we were on the call. We talked really often, and he said, "Hey man, why don't you just turn down your engineering jobs and come to move to Syracuse with me and help me out and build my business, right?" That's interesting because I've always known that I want to be an entrepreneur in some form or fashion. And my thought process when making that decision was that, well, I'm broke now. What's being broke another couple of years if things don't work out, right? Mm-hmm. But if they do work out, this could be something that could drastically benefit my life for the better. I took that leap of faith. So this was back in 2005, 2006 area. I took that leap of faith, and my parents were extremely mad. They weren't just mad at me. They were mildly mad at me. They were like really mad at my brother since he's 12 years my senior. It's like, you're supposed to be the big brother, teaching him to be on the guided path in terms of doing the right things, whatever. You got him ruining his career, moving to Syracuse. But they had thought Syracuse was like New York City, and it's not. The opposite. Right. You move into this big city. Right. And they just didn't really understand. And, I had been exposed to more by that period of time. So I had known was out there a little bit more. And it was like, well, I could always go back to engineering if things don't work out. But when am I ever going to have like this little responsibility in my life? And I'm glad I did it. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Yeah, that's great to hear that you had like a sibling that was willing to say, reach back and say like, how about we try this? But like, can you talk about that dynamic of having parents who have a certain vision and then you going against that grain? Like, I'm curious, like, did you suffer any consequences, like no mac and cheese for Thanksgiving or anything of the sort because you chose a different path at the beginning?
Man, I feel very blessed in that regard where, we have a tight-knit family. And even though they didn't understand my decision in terms of why I would do something like that, they still respected it. Right. So there was no grudges held, no less mac and cheese for Thanksgiving, nothing like that. Right. It was more probably me being like really afraid. Yeah. So it was really me. Let me share this now. Being really afraid of what they were going to say. What were they going to think? What if this failed? This big business venture that we have, what if it failed? What were we going to do on that particular front? Yeah. But no, they've always been supportive. Like, even though they were mad at the time, they got over it. They said, you're a man, you make your own decisions. And they treated me like their son, like they had always treated me.
Very nice. You go to Syracuse. Is that when you go back to grad school after you sort of have a vision of what the next phase will be? And then you said grad school is a good complement, or like? Yeah,
exactly. Right. I did a program called Management Leadership for Tomorrow, MLT. After I finished undergrad, I did that program to help me get into a good business school. After that, I had learned about the program. Another program I did in college called SVMP, so Summer Venture and Management Program, where they send you to Harvard Business School for a week, teach you the case study method. That's how they teach their courses. Have professors come in, just show you what being a Harvard Business School student, that type of thing. And a lot of those kids there were actually in MLT, the undergraduate version of it. So it was through that experience that I learned that this next program existed. And, looking back on that now, there's definitely a pattern that actually happens on that particular front. There's this like secret pipeline. I don't know if it's secret, but this pipeline, like the power of pipelines. Right. So once you get into one pipeline, it leads to the next opportunity, which leads to the next opportunity. And sooner or later, you have to put in the work, right? But then a lot of things have already been kind of predetermined in terms of your pathway, if you want it to be, to like the good life. If as long as you just kind of do what people tell you to do, and finish the program and do the next thing. I think we need more of those types of pipelines out here for like Black kids who are just doing the right things. They just don't know how to get from one step to the next. Because I guarantee you, some of these rich white kids that I interact with, wealthy white kids, wealthy white people, they are up on game with those unofficial pipelines. They might not have an official one, but their dinner table serves at the pipeline. Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner serves at those types of pipelines. It's a good way for us to have those similar types of networks.
And I appreciate you sharing the names of these programs, because I've talked on prior episodes just about how that growing up, say before like the age of 21, a lot of your experience is based off of things largely out of your control because of your environment, your family. You don't necessarily get to control the neighborhoods you live in and the access to the resources you have. Like, I'm curious from your perspective, like, how do we help people get access to those opportunities to get into those pipelines that you're speaking of? Like, what do you think is really like a key thing preventing us from getting access to those sort of programs and opportunities?
I think there's two things, maybe three. So one is knowing about them, right? You'll be surprised, even like working for, what I work for now, what I do here. We have a lot of just different programs and other things that are out here. Some that I know about, some that I just don't know about. They have a hard time getting people into the programs because they have a hard time marketing the programs. They don't know where to go market, where to find these kids, where to find these adults to actually take advantage of these particular types of opportunities. So I would say like that's the first step. It's just awareness and making these programs and making these things extremely aware. But I think there's another step that's in there. I'm going off the fly because I hadn't really thought about this question before. I would say the second thing would be, once the awareness has been established, making people to actually believe that the program is for them. Because a lot of times we self-select out of stuff, right? So there's things that we might actually qualify for, and we may not even actually fully qualify for, right? But we say, that's not for me. I don't know about that. When it's better just to apply and let them tell you no, and you not tell yourself no, right? And I even have to remind myself that, nowadays, when I think about my next career moves, my next steps, no, I'm going to apply for everything that I think I could potentially be a fit for, and then let them tell me no on that particular front. And then I think the third piece is developing making sure that people have like a base level knowledge and skill set to actually be successful in those programs and those things once they actually like get in. How do you continue to increase skill development to make sure that people, once they are provided with opportunity, once they believe they have opportunity, actually have the skill set necessary to actually achieve in that particular opportunity as well?
Okay. Got it. Like, I appreciate you, because these programs, to me, at least growing up, like a lot of stuff was in my backyard and I didn't even know what it was. I grew up in Durham, but didn't really understand what Research Triangle Park was, even though people outside of North Carolina know what Research Triangle Park is. There's people growing up here who don't even realize what's right in their backyard. And so I appreciate you sharing your point of view on that. You're in that Syracuse area, you're going through your program, you're starting to get into these different networks that's opening up these opportunities. Like, as an entrepreneur, like what do you feel like was the toughest thing to figure out early, that if you could go back and tell yourself now, like, it would have really helped get you to the next level?
Man, that's a hard question, because my mindset today is very different than my mindset back in 2007 when I started my first company. Right. So the first company that I actually started was called Great Black Speakers. And it was a direct outgrowth of the work that I did with my brother, helping him to get on national media in terms of national media appearances and to help him get speaking engagements at universities. Right. So I did that very, very well. Right. And I remember, because I didn't know very much about business up until this point, especially how to be an entrepreneur or even run a business. I had a lot of like self-study to do. So I remember waking up in the morning, testing something, reviewing in the afternoon and the evening time, reading at night, thinking through what I was going to test tomorrow, and doing the exact same thing over and over and over again till I became really good at helping boys to get speaking engagements, basically, and do media. After getting him like 12 or 13 of these things, he said, "Man, you're doing really good at this. Well, have you ever thought about starting something on your own? Like maybe call it even like Great Black Speakers or something like that, right? I don't think he said the name at the point, but he was like doing something for the like Black speakers in the college market. And I think blackspeakers.com was taken, so we went with Great Black Speakers. And it was through that particular experience, he was right, that I started my first company in 2007, where we help African Americans. So what we did was help African Americans, organizations to find African American public speakers for their particular events. Excuse me, I haven't pitched it in quite a while. I was getting my pitches mixed up. Like, no, that's not the right one. Yeah.
Entrepreneur problems.
Yeah, exactly. I had to, go back into the vault, for the Great Black Speakers. But I remember running it as a business to serve me and my potential, my particular needs. It was at the time that a really popular book came out called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. So 4-Hour Workweek basically talks to you how to create a lifestyle business to serve you. Right. And that book came out maybe like 2 months after I started, full time, running Great Black Speakers. So it was like my Bible on that particular front in terms of how I live my life. Right. In terms of outsourcing everything, trying to do as little work as possible. So I have as much as free time as possible. Don't necessarily stress yourself out too much. Go out and live life, that type of stuff. And I'm glad I did it that way because I got to do a lot of things. I traveled the world. I didn't have to work very much. I had this, income generating machine. Even though it wasn't a lot of income, I didn't have to really work too hard to actually achieve that level of income. And I'm getting back to your question in terms of what I would tell myself in the past, or tell myself from the past. I probably should have worked harder during my 20s than I actually did. Actually, being someone who's 39, about to be 40 this year, with 2 kids now, I wish I would have worked harder in my 20s and been more disciplined day in and day out with my work. Because all the stuff that was fun, I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad I got to live in different countries and travel and, do all this, cool stuff. And I wouldn't trade that. But I would have worked harder on my business to have something even more, sustainable. Yeah, even more sustainable, like long term. I wish I would have done that.
I think that's I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's a pretty common theme when we look back, say, because I'm 36. When I look back at what I'm doing currently versus what I did in my 20s, like, man, I left a lot of meat on the bone, if you will. And it was just young, naive, unexposed, ignorant, hard-headed, stubborn to a large degree. And I had to get out of my own way, in my opinion, and looking back. It was once I got out of my own way, life started really to change differently for me. I appreciate you talking about, like, if you could go back, you would work harder, because there are people listening who potentially, like, the difference is that you're not putting in what you need to put in at a given moment. And people who reach certain levels of success, like, you don't know how many hours they spend obsessing over getting to that point and the commitment that went in, behind closed doors. I appreciate you sharing that thought. When we talk about this idea of entrepreneurship, given what you do now, working to find certain entrepreneurs, I guess you were doing the entrepreneur thing. I'm curious, like, what have you found to be the most, like, personally, the most challenging piece of, say, working for yourself versus, say, working for someone else?
The most challenging piece with working for yourself, I'm going to say, is making sure that you work for yourself harder than you work for other people. Yeah, because you don't have anyone breathing down your neck telling you to get this thing done. You got to do that yourself, right? And I think a lot of times, when we are our own boss, we don't work nearly as hard, causes us to not have the same level of impact and same outcomes as others when it comes to growing successful large scale types of companies. Yeah, so that's the hardest thing. Waking up every day and working for myself just as hard as I work for someone else, or harder.
Okay. And let me ask you this too, because at some point you met someone who you married. When you met your wife, how did that change how you pursued your entrepreneurial efforts?
I don't know if it changed it too much. I found myself explaining what an entrepreneur does way more. So I had to consider like that and consider, I don't know if getting married and meeting my wife is what changed things. It was probably the kids piece. The kids piece is what really changed things. Like getting married, because after we were married, we traveled to Europe and South America for a year, right? With me as an entrepreneur and her running her own business too, right? So we still did a lot. So I kind of me and my family recruited her to the entrepreneurial space and converted her on that particular front. Right. So I don't know if much changed from my perspective in terms of that, but doing time management and thinking about what changes when you have children and this other priority that's even higher than like fulfilling your goal as an entrepreneur in terms of what you want to accomplish in this world. That was the real game changer in life.
How long were you and your wife married before you had your first child?
Let's see, 3 years, 3.5.
What was like the biggest sort of like, because I've talked to a couple parents on the podcast, and I always like to tease parents for certain, just because like the reality is you have these kids, and I know when you as a couple have kids, nothing is the same. I'm curious, like, what really, say for you as a husband, changed that you maybe didn't like really think or anticipate once the kid arrived?
How much you love them. Yeah, like that was a big thing for me, is not having experienced that type of love before, that raw sense of emotion on that level, right? Because romantic love, some form or fashion, you've experienced that you're in your life starting age 12, I don't know, with some younger age, you had a crush on somebody or whatever, right? Now the intensity of it varies in terms of what it actually looks like, but you've kind of been experiencing that throughout life. But when you have a child, that's an emotion that you've never really experienced before. And when you think about like this idea of like creation, right, of an actual person, this like being that you created, and then this woman that helped create this being and did basically most of the work in terms of carrying it and getting it to this world that a lot of times looks like you. In my case, it did, right? That you just love, you hear her cry. That was the most joyful moment of my life, was when my daughter was born, and then subsequently when my son was born. Those definitely the two happiest moments of my life, right? So just that level of joy that comes with being like a parent, and like that level of love that you didn't know that you had for someone else. It's something that I could never explain beforehand, and I wouldn't even try to explain, in terms of what it feels like, because I remember having that same feeling, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna love this. Oh, okay, yeah. But then like you hear the heartbeat for the first time, in the doctor, then you hear them cry for the first time, and then now it's just you got these two beings. I have these two beings here that I just love beyond anything, ever. Yeah, so that's like emotionally the biggest change that has ever occurred.
But you did mention the kids as sort of what made you pivot back, or pivot sort of your how you were making money for the household. You started to think about like bigger picture maybe, or just a different perspective on life now that you have different responsibilities. How did you fall into this investment sort of opportunity, given that you had the background, living the entrepreneurial life with the travel? How did you end up getting to a point where you said, I think this makes sense for me?
So we were living overseas even though we traveled for a year, we settled in Medellin, Colombia. So we were in Medellin for 4 years, and our children were actually born in Medellin. All right. So they're dual citizens between the United States and Medellin. And I thought I was going to be in Medellin for many, many years to come. But then COVID happened. And then my dad got sick too. He was overcoming, he was battling prostate cancer or whatever. Right. So it was a combination of COVID, my parents getting older, and Carlos, my wife's parents, getting older, and then having like these new children. I wanted what I love more than Medellin was the idea of my kids knowing their grandparents, right? So it was with that we decided to move from, from Medellin back to Texas, to be closer to family, that type of thing, right? I would also say that in my latest business with my brother, called the Black Business School, that we started about 6 years ago. We've done really well with that. We've bootstrapped that. So what we do is help African Americans to obtain a culturally relevant yet practical education in all things wealth building at an affordable price. So we've been really successful in terms of bootstrapping that to millions of dollars of revenue, 150,000 students over the last 6 years or so, and that's great. And I love the impact. I love the community and impact that we've actually made on that particular front. But I still wanted to do something a little bit bigger, right? So instead of talking about 7-figure types of companies. What it would be like to own and operate a 9-figure type of business, right? And I didn't know how to make companies grow from 7 figures to 9 figures. And I didn't know how companies are actually funded to make that happen, because we bootstrapped our business to the point where it is now. So that's when I decided to make that pivot, to make that switch from entrepreneurship to investing, to learn how to scale an individual company beyond 7 figures, and seeing what type of impact that can have on the community, but then also from a personal legacy, wealth building type of standpoint as well.
So let's talk about some of that a little bit, like, because you've built different businesses, like very difficult to do just once. And I think one of the most difficult things in business is the art of selling, having clients, finding who your customer base is. Like, can we just talk about how important it is to understand if you have a demand for what you're offering, and how you maybe find the people who are looking for what it is that you want to bring to the market?
It's the most important thing in business. Literally, when I talk to people now so this is the first time I've actually ever been an employee. So I started working at where I do now when I was 38 years old. And I see things from a different perspective. And I get to see a lot of different companies now. I think for Black people, the 2 most important things that they could do is, 1, get ownership in assets that are increasing in value. And then 2, learn how to acquire a customer, right? Like, those are the 2 biggest and most important skills from wealth building standpoint that I think that any Black person should be really be pursuing. So customer acquisition is so key in really understanding your target customer in terms of who your audience is, who your target audience is, and then going deep in terms of what do they believe, what do they care about, who are their role models, what are they thinking, what are their fears, what are their aspirations. Just thinking through all of that to the point where you become that individual. And it's through that identification and that discovery, you are able to craft offers and things that resonate with that particular group, so you can actually sell them something of value. And the process of that discovery is the most important skill, I think, in business. I don't care what anyone says, you have to learn how to sell customers and deeply understand their needs, to service them, and also to get their money for something of value.
In your personal experience, what are some of the character traits that or just skills that help do that to the best of your to do that at its highest level, in your opinion?
I would say ask good questions, listen, and then learn how to synthesize what you hear into something that is actionable, because that's where the product development piece actually comes into play. But listening and asking good questions is the key to that discovery process. And also observing too, though, right? So you can ask people good questions, but you can also observe their behaviors, observe their actions as well. I think that's most important.
And the other thing you mentioned outside of customer acquisition was assets. Like, when we talk about assets, I'm curious, different types of assets that we can invest in, but what are, especially in today's world, we get marketed on crypto and just so many different, ways to invest your money. What do you think are some core assets as, that the Black community should be focused on, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm more traditional in that type of way. All right. So I think about a few different things, right? So, let me take a step back. I created an entire framework called the Black Family Master Plan. So it was a framework that I created out of a conversation that I was having with my wife. She was asking all these questions about what needed to be done. And she was also a little upset that I was using my skills and my, asset, or my skill set of creating frameworks. I was always using that for business, but not necessarily to benefit our personal lives, right? So it's through a lot of that work that I created the Black Family Master Plan, but it's basically broken down into 4 quadrants: earn, protect, sustain, connect. So earn is, how do you increase your income and income sources? Protect is how do you go about limiting downside risk in life? Sustain is how do you make life day-to-day pleasurable and fulfilling? And the connect is how do you build those relationships with those that you care about the most? And in the earn quadrant, I think about a few different things. So for me personally, entrepreneurship is key to wealth creation, wealth generation. Some people might say your job in terms of, income that you actually, have by working for someone else. But like my friend Julian Gordon always says is, what does he say? An employee is just an entrepreneur with one client. So that's how he kind of defines it. All right. But anyway, that's one piece of it. Another piece is real estate in regards to the real estate that you own for your own personal use. I view that as consumption, and we both do, but no matter, it appreciates in value most of the time. So there's that aspect of it, but then also multifamily or whatever, renting single family homes, some of that's cash flowing on that perspective. The third piece is stock market investing. So what types of stocks do you own long term? But really, people forget that owning a stock is really just owning a piece of a large company, right? So it's business ownership and investing in large businesses that you own a very, very minuscule piece of that you don't control majority of the times, unless you have $1 billion to invest in whatever company. And then the last piece of it is, I called it micro private equity at the time, but now it's just, I'm thinking about private equity. So are you buying into businesses that you have a smaller companies that you have a more substantial ownership stake in? So that's an area that I care a lot about as well. And I'll be going out making some acquisitions here, hopefully in the next year or so.
Okay, word up. So when we talk about like it's that framework, can you just say the name? Is it somewhere for people to access, or is it just like in your personal bag of tricks that's not available for people to learn more about?
Yeah. So yes and no. Well, it's on LinkedIn somewhere or Facebook. I always said I'm gonna get around to it and make it an actual asset. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think I should like make that into a community or something around like the Black Family Master Plan or whatever?
I think it's a conversation worth having, and I think the value in frameworks is that it gives the guardrails to have a conversation in a constructive way. If you've already, put together, and it sounds like a comprehensive framework that's been thought out with, and it's a good discussion piece, at least a reference point to start those discussions. And then, people are going to have their own point of views, but at least it gives like a starting point as to what you can consider for your own situation. So I think it is something worth fleshing out even further.
I know. And I always say that, and I'm like, then the real work begins of actually fleshing it out. Like, oh man, I got to actually work on this thing. But I think that actually might be one of the things that I do. But the answer is no. There's no place really. I'll share it with you though. You can share it with your community.
Yeah. So look, man, let's we gotta follow that up with listeners saying, yeah, we should do that. That's a great idea. The framework is people. That's one of the things that I think I've really realized here recently in the past couple of years is that what may come natural to me does not come natural to everyone else. And the way that like I may process ideas or think that something just makes sense, other people doesn't even think about it that way at all. To the point earlier about just exposure, letting people know that this is a good route to take, letting people know that these are opportunities that you can access. When we provide that framework earlier in the conversation, I think it just helps the whole, it helps lift everyone up in a way, because it gives even, people who are struggling, who may want to get to that next level, may not be knowing how to literally get from A to B to C, but oh man, here's a framework that didn't exist. And now it gives me some things to really think about that are tangible, that I can implement and slowly build toward the next level.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's something on my mind. I see that little push over, give me over the hump with that. But yeah. So did I even answer the question? Oh, I did answer the question. In regards to just
you did. And I appreciate you answering that. And the other thing I want to talk about, like before we run out of time, is keeping it business. The work that you do now is, and correct me if I'm off on this, but from what I understand, you have a mission to help diversify supply chains. I want to especially you talked about COVID, how that sort of impacted your decision to change some things. That term supply chain was definitely a hot topic during the COVID time period, because everything was impacted across all industries, and it was supply chain, right? So before we even talk about like diversifying, like for the listeners, like if we could break that down as simple as can be, like what is a supply chain when we talk about this concept of supply chain? What do we mean by that? What is the chain or the flow of resources necessary to produce a good or service, right? That a company needs to produce that good or service. So you have this podcast, and we're on StreamYard right now. So StreamYard is a part of your supply chain to produce this podcast that we're on,
right? But companies of all sizes, or every company has some type of supply chain with their product and service. And the large companies, your Fortune 500s, your Fortune 100s, are spending billions and billions of dollars to produce the products and services that are making them into those Fortune 100, those Fortune 500 types of companies. And my thought process and what I advocate for is for more diverse companies, more Black businesses to be a part of those supply chains. Because the more that we can be suppliers of these large corporations and government agencies, the more wealth that's bringing to our community. Because the only way to succeed in the business long term is to create a customer and to have a customer. So the more that we can get these large corporations and businesses to be our customers, the better off Black communities will be nationwide.
Let me just offer some pushback here, because I hear what you're saying from a Black community standpoint, but if I'm a Fortune 100, why does diversifying the supply chain have any benefit to my bottom line?
A couple of reasons, right? So first, especially talking about the browning and blacking of the United States, companies are facing an existential crisis in terms of demographic change, right? So having a supply base that doesn't match your demographic change, you're missing a huge opportunity to actually serve those same suppliers and those communities as actual customers. So when you're thinking about it from that perspective, a lot of businesses, especially the Latino communities, they are looking at that wholeheartedly and in full force in regards to, we can promote Latinx company right here and put that in our marketing campaigns and using that as a way to say, look, we support your community. Buy from us. We're Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson or whoever that actually may be. But then also it comes down to a question of business diversity. Some of those white suppliers and those other companies that you use for 30 years or whatever, they kind of suck, all right? And you need to open up the doors and opportunities to other types of businesses and new ways of doing things and new strategies of doing things. You need to open that up so you can find the best suppliers so you can make the best products possible for your business as well.
Yeah, because I'm curious, does the term, because the term DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, does the work that you're speaking about as relates to supply chains, that fit under that umbrella, or are we talking something completely different here?
It should fit underneath that umbrella, but it really does. So when you have specific like DEI conversations, a lot of times that falls under in terms of hiring and employment. And what does it mean to, I guess your employees are supplying your business with like the labor necessary for you to produce that product and service. But that's usually or oftentimes different sector than actual companies that have some raw good that you actually need to make your particular make your product or service. I think the umbrella that it falls underneath more so is ESG, right? So environmental social governance of an organization. And ESG has become, controversial in many circles, but something that, is definitely not going away with these corporations moving forward.
1,000%, I would agree with that. So okay, if that's the case, okay, how do you bridge? I guess this is what you're working on, but how do you bridge that gap in helping connect these multi-billion-dollar multinational enterprises to more local, smaller, diverse suppliers who can offer them something to benefit their bottom line as a business? Like if I am a local entrepreneur and I produce a good or service that one of these major companies or the government can benefit from, how do I get their attention to take advantage of those opportunities?
And therein lies the question, right? And I think a big problem in terms of making that happen is many of these small businesses that you're talking about are too small to do business with these corporations and government agencies, right? Because you might be able to service 12 different restaurants. Let's say it's a restaurant chain or something, but McDonald's needs you to supply 1,000 restaurants. So it's building up enough capacity in these companies, in these businesses, these minority, these Black-owned businesses, where they have the actual capacity to fulfill a larger scale contract. So that is what we've uncovered to be the biggest issue with adding more diverse businesses to supply chain. It's not that companies don't want to do business with Black-owned companies or minority businesses or however you want to define it. It's a lot of times the businesses are too small to do business with the Fortune 500s.
Wow. Interesting. Too small. Like, now, I guess it's so many different examples, because when you talk about supply chains, you talk about verticals, you talk about all the things that go into a business. It's so many different goods and services that can be a part of a supply chain, especially at this level of enterprise. But I guess, like, with that said, what are maybe some key like pathways that you've seen maybe have the least amount of friction in like getting there to that relationship? Like if I am an aspiring business person trying to come up with the game plan on what my next product or service might be, and knowing that I'm going after this market of Fortune 100, 500 companies to do business with them long term. In your experience, what are some of those key goods and services that you think are going to be really at the forefront here in the near future or currently?
Well, that's a simple yet slightly unexplored question that we are actively talking about often right now. I would first say there's a mindset shift that needs to be happening. If you want to be an entrepreneur to serve a Fortune 500 company now, chances are you won't be starting that company from scratch, right? You will be acquiring some existing business and then growing and scaling from there. Not to say it's not possible. On the federal government side, there are programs like 8A, 8A certification, those types of things that make it easier to get your foot in the door to do business. But with like corporations, some have programs to kind of help scale you up. If you already have, let's say, $1 million in revenue or $750,000 in revenue, but if you're at like zero, that's very, very difficult to do. So we've been focused on, how are we identifying the larger small businesses who are out here and putting fuel on the fire to help them be able to increase their capacity more. So if you're new to the entire space, I would just really look at, you can't even look at what corporations are buying. You can, but it's not public information. Right. But we're looking to make that more public. We're looking to do that, that specific type of research to really understand what is they're buying. A lot of times it's in things that have low margin types of businesses. And that's something that we're really trying to change. Right. So it might be construction or janitorial services or whatever. But the professional and technical types of things that have high margins are still going to the good old boy network, or even good old boy, but then also the tried and true that they're comfortable with already actually using, right? So it's really breaking into those other things that is going to be key. And that really comes down to relationships and being able to navigate and leverage those relationships for company growth.
Interesting. That is, it's to me, it's important work, but it's also very like just interesting to think about because, like we've been saying, these big companies, they do business with a lot of vendors throughout the different departments. They have a lot of different needs, and going through procurement with some of these companies, like negotiate, like they are trying to squeeze every bit of value out of every exchange with the vendor that they possibly can. So I like to think that if they have opportunities to get something that is of the same quality, if not better, for a lower price, then you have a fighting chance, right? But like you said, you're looking for bigger companies that already have an established footprint, but can't get to the next level. Similar to, I'm sort of tying it up, similar to yourself as an entrepreneur, right? You said that you got to a certain level, but it was like, how do you go from a 7-figure to a 9-figure? That's scalability, right? So I guess my question is like, what do you think is missing typically from a business prevents it from going from 7 to 9 figures? Like, I know it's not one thing, but could you highlight a couple of just key items that you really think need to be in place when you have like something really good, but you want to make it?
Really, there's only 2 things that you need. Well, maybe 3. Customers. That's the number one most important thing. Not for real. All right. If you have enough customers out here and you know how to go about getting them, then you can scale yourself. That's the most important piece of business, is like acquiring that customer. I would say after that, access to capital sources and knowing how to structure the deals necessary to get you the capital to grow your company, right? So you have bank loans, but then you have different types of equity financing. You have blended types of stuff. There's just a lot of different ways that you can go out and get this money, and being prepared to actually use that capital once you actually get it. But then that's another thing is, once you get the money, you have to use it effectively. So do you know what you're going to use that capital for? Is it going to be just straight marketing, customer acquisition? Is it going to be scaling your operations in terms of production, hiring people, getting new machinery, or whatever it is, right? So that type of know-how also limits company, because there's mindset shifts that need to occur when you continue to scale, and that's scaling every stage. Having a $50,000 company is different than having $1 million company. Having $1 million company is different than having $10 million company. Having $10 million company is different than having a $100 million company. No stage is harder than the next stage, right? But you just have to learn how, to navigate and get through each stage of the process.
That is very true. It's just a different, different toilet, but it's just a different, same nature, but it's just a different beast that you're sort of dealing with. And from at least from my perspective, when we talk business, the market, like understanding your customer base, like I understand the importance of that. Oftentimes as entrepreneurs, the order of operations in which you do things can be like why you don't get to the next level, because you put the cart before the horse, if you will. And so to your point about like marketing, customer acquisition, in my experience, I've noticed sometimes entrepreneurs, like there's an imbalance of quality marketing, but then not being able to meet the needs of what you just marketed to. For example, so you have like this great marketing campaign and you got everybody's attention, you have the customers, but then you can't fulfill the needs of those customers, and then you might lose them over time. From your point of view, when you're trying to go to market and figure out like how to take full advantage, like what do you think is like from an order of operations standpoint? Do you feel like it's more important to invest in that marketing acquisition, even if, say, maybe you don't have the full thing ready to deliver? Like, I guess I'm curious, like we see it so often, GoFundMe's, crowdfunding for a product that's under design, still getting developed. All you see is a prototype, and then they got all these orders, and then you can't meet the orders because it never gets fulfilled. Like from a business standpoint, do you feel like that sort of approach is beneficial or like, a smart thing to do? Or are you better off like doing the opposite and really making sure from an operations standpoint, you have all that locked down and then go try to capture as big a market possible? Like, how do you balance both of those?
I'm always a fan of getting the customer before you actually have the product. Right. And the reason is, if you build a product without the customer, you don't know if customers are actually going to come and purchase the product. And then also you lose the opportunity to make your product better because you're not getting that real-time feedback in regards to like, all right, we need to change this, we need to change that, because customers are telling us that that's what they actually want to see. And you wouldn't know that unless you actually talk to the customers and put something in front of them that, this is actually what it's going to look like, what it's going to be, what it's going to do. And then them giving you feedback in regards to, what has been, offered in front of them. So the worst thing in the world is to like build something that nobody actually wants, So you really need to assess demand and make sure that people actually want something and prototype that and go from there versus actually building something. Because it's not, what's that movie Field of Dreams from the 1990s? If they build it, it's not necessarily they'll be coming, for you, right, and coming to you. So I would say build it. I would say, see if they come and see what people want, and then actually build off their specifications.
Jules, man. And so we're gonna start to close out, but like I'm curious, like in doing this sort of work, working with other entrepreneurs to help them scale, what have been some of the early lessons that you've picked up in this sort of role? So
that's only one piece of my role right now. Eventually it'll be like the largest piece. Right now I work for a VC fund out of Oklahoma, out of Tulsa called. So we are the arm of a large foundation here called and we're deploying $100 million in basically the state of Oklahoma to recruit the best talent in terms of founders to the city in hopes that they grow the best companies possible and provide jobs and employment for the residents here as well, and also make us more money in terms of return on investment type of standpoint. So what I've learned so far with working with the companies is that there are a lot of passionate people out here who are willing to put that hustle, willing to put that grind into making the business work. I think a lot of founders don't know how to sell and tell their story very well in a deeper type of format, right? So some get to the point where they can do a 2 or 3 minute pitch about their business. But if you ask them like deeper questions in terms of, the product market fit and pushback and all those other types of things, if you really want to have a deeper understanding about a subject, they struggle, they fumble with, actually answering those types of questions, I would say, for potential entrepreneurs is to deeply and really understand your business and also the core value proposition of your company so that you can sell it to potential customers and also potential employees and investors as well. And that's missing from a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they first get started.
When we say core value prop, can you just explain what you mean by that?
So your value proposition. So why am I going to choose this business to solve my particular product, especially over competitors or substitutes that could do the same thing and solve my same problem?
It is so key. It is so key. And without, like you said, it all goes back to that access to information. You don't know what you don't know. When you're out here on the grind and you have that willingness to put in the work, but you're missing some of that key information, man, it can really like almost make you resent the work you're doing. It can sometimes the ignorance, that liability of ignorance that exists when doing business, like it can cost you in the long run or in the short term. So having this information, I think, is going to be so valuable for entrepreneurs listening. You got to work on your pitch. Like everybody's got to know how to sell. And if you got a business and you don't understand some of these core elements that he's speaking about, can they learn this at the Black Business School? Like, I'm curious, like, are some of the things that you guys help the community learn more about?
Yeah, exactly. So we have three fundamental pillars of wealth building for us: entrepreneurship, stock market investing, and real estate investing. And when it comes to the entrepreneurship piece, that's core and fundamental is learning how to sell, but selling isn't the thing and the activities that people often associate it with it and think that it is. A lot of time it is understanding customer problems, the impact of those problems, and figuring out how to explain how your solution fixes those problems that they're having in their own individual lives, right? Mm-hmm. That's the basis of selling. A lot of that comes through listening, really understanding, what people are going through.
Mm-hmm. Gotta have or not say you got to, but when we talk sales, it's definitely more of a consultative approach, understanding the needs of your audience and making sure you speak to how you can address those needs, and tying and connecting the dots is definitely the way to go. We've gone over your background. You shared some of your stories as it relates to your entrepreneurial effort, some of what you're doing now with the community. Are there any last like closing words that you want to like leave the audience with, whether it be to, we'll keep them posted on the framework. We'll have to circle back and figure out how we can work together, even to maybe even have another episode and talk through the framework even more. Maybe we record it.
Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah.
Let people kind of hear that. But anything that you want to leave the people with, any final words or anything you want to let them know you got going on? I
really just appreciate the opportunity to, speak with you and your audience in regards to, what we're doing here in Tulsa and around supplier diversity. Yeah, really about family and life and your overarching motto and definitely everything else too. I appreciate that. You got to stay focused. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Man, I appreciate you joining. In case y'all are wondering or wanting to learn more, I know Lawrence, do you still do the newsletter on LinkedIn as well?
With these kids, I had to shut something down, and that was the thing. So I might be doing a Black Business Monthly or something like that. But we'll see on that particular front. But follow me on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, Lawrence Watkins. I think it's handle Lawrence LAWRENCE. M as in Matthew, Watkins. So find me, the Black Business School.
And I'll make sure on the follow-up when we put out the edited episode, I'll put the links for the Black Business School, put the links in to make sure that people can connect with you. For everybody listening, whether you're here on Instagram, here on the YouTube, make your way over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening, this is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. Shout out to Lawrence Watkins for joining us. We are out of here.
I'm not taking no talk back.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the G Pod.